Wendy, welcome. I'm so happy to have you here.
Thanks so much. I'm so excited to be here.
You were worried about your resume before you came in. And as I read that, I'm like, you do a lot. You run businesses. You have 3 kids. You have 3 teenagers right now. Or
Adults, actually.
3
They're all
adults,
in
yeah, in their 20s.
their 20s. Yep.
I don't know what's harder, when they're young kids or when they're in their 20s.
When they're in their 20s.
They have more
I-
attitudes. They're not as cute
um,
anymore.
So someone told me a long time ago, bigger kids, bigger problems. And that has always stuck with me, right?
Yes.
Like they learn how to drive and you're like, oh crap, now I'm going to give them a keys to a car that they can take them anywhere. When they're little, you can say, do this, and they listen to you.
Yeah. And when does that stop? After 7?
Probably. Well, my kids were pretty good, but
Good.
I was the oldest. So like I ran away when I was 2. I didn't run away. We were moving and I walked across the street and into somebody's yard and was on a swing set. My parents were like, where the hell is she? Like, I don't know where she is. And we had a dog. That's how they found me. And it just
Thank
continued
God
from
for
there.
the dog.
My mom says that all the time.
Sometimes parents are funny when kids act that way. They're like, if you want to stay with this family, go ahead. Bye.
When we moved into our new house, my oldest, was maybe 4 or 5, wanted to run away. And I was like, okay, I'll pack your bags for you. Where are you going? I was like, okay. I was one of those weird parents that I just I always say this, I felt like I was young, right? I was 22 when I had my first kid. And so I just kind of rolled with it. I'm an extremely laid back person to begin with. And I remember one time were throwing a tantrum and I was like, well, I can scream louder than you. And I screamed back at them because I was just frustrated.
And your husband was close to your age as well?
Yeah, he's 18 months older than I am.
Yeah. Wow. Kids having kids, hey?
Yeah. Yep.
My mom was 21 when she had me. So yeah, similar age. And she always says that she's glad she had me in her 20s because she wouldn't have been able to do it in her 40s. Like she wouldn't have had the energy.
I agree with that. And I have friends who actually have had kids in their 40s. And I look at it and I'm like, okay, I get it. If I never had kids in my 20s, I might consider having a kid in my 40s. But because I had kids in my 20s, I couldn't imagine having a kid right now. Like my kids are 24, 22, and almost 20. And my friend's daughter is 4.
Imagine I have a 4-year-old. You couldn't do it.
No. I mean, I could, but I wouldn't want to.
Well, my mom always said she enjoyed it at her age, And
Yes.
But let's put things in perspective. So you were 27 with 3 kids under 5.
Yep.
So yeah, I'm 27. I
Yep.
can imagine having 3 toddlers running around right now.
Yep.
Oh my goodness.
Yep. They were 4, 2, and a newborn when my youngest was born.
Talk to me about those days. Oh my goodness.
So it's interesting for me. I did whatever I wanted. I would go to the mall and I remember going into a Friendly's and the woman said to me, are you waiting for somebody? And I was like, no, it's the 4 of us. Like, this is what it is. And she looked at me like I was crazy because she was like this young, probably late teens, early 20s. And I was like, yeah, this is what it is. Thank goodness my oldest had conversational skills because they grew up in a house before my husband and I moved out. There were 7 adults in it. So,
Wow, what do you mean?
so when I got pregnant, I moved back home.
Mhm.
And then my husband moved in with my parents. And I have 3 siblings. So everybody lived
Wow.
in the house. So when my oldest was born, he had 6 other adults. So if I didn't want to deal with a crying baby, somebody else would deal with a crying baby.
6 other people to help
6
out.
other people.
That makes
So
parenting a lot easier.
It was definitely interesting. It was that torn between, yes, I'm glad that I have your help, and wait, this is my kid. I want to do it on my own.
And they're also probably still treating you like a kid, like their daughter and a kid.
So I was fortunate that my siblings were all like, oh, yay, let's have this new toy to play with. So that was fun. The hard part was as I had kids, right? We'd be at family events and I'd have 3 kids and I'd have to be watching these kids and they would all be like hanging out and having a drink. And I would be like, okay, let's figure out what we're going to do to play with the kids. And my siblings were great, but they never really understood. And now when they had kids, my kids were like taking care of themselves. And they're like, oh, we have to get a plate of food for my kid. And I was like, yep, I'm not doing that. My kids are old enough. So it is this cycle that happens.
And I find, and tell me if this is true, as you have more kids, the older ones start taking care of the younger ones?
Sort of. My kids were kind of all close in age. So The older two are very close. They shared a room. They were troublemakers together. People thought that they were twins for a good portion of their lives.
Cute.
So they were very close. And then my daughter, my youngest one, she was a daddy's girl, to be honest. So she was always with him. So it kind of worked out. 3 is an odd number, though. Like I would have had 4 kids. I wanted 4 kids.
Really? See, I've always wanted 3. I always thought that was such a fun amount.
So it is, except when you have, like, you go to an amusement park. Well, unless you bring a friend, one kid is always sitting by themselves, or you're going on the ride
Right.
because you don't have somebody for that other child. So, but my husband didn't want any more kids and we compromised because he only wanted 2. I wanted 4 and we had 3. So,
I think that's fair.
yeah.
So I know, and I want to get into it. I know you had a roller coaster of many years and it still goes on with your youngest daughter. So if you want to
Yes.
jump into that.
Yeah, sure. So everything was typical normal. Like we were a normal family. And like I said, I was fortunate that I knew a lot of moms that stayed home and my kids played soccer and we had this great like friend group and all this stuff. And then August of 2010, I was bringing my older 2 kids to camp and my middle one was like, "Mom, Jordan's having a seizure." And I was like, "What?" And I looked in the rearview mirror and she was slumped over. She was foaming at the mouth. She was like shaking. She had like one of those big types of seizures. And I just remember my oldest is sitting in the front seat with me, screaming at me. It was a beautiful summer day. And in my head, I'm like, okay, where am I going? And thankfully, in the town we live in, we were right by the police station, fire station, the main ones that are for the city. So I took the road around the back and a police officer happened to be coming out. And it was so like surreal in the sense that like the ambulance was there right away. They had her, they were taking her out. But then it was like, I have to call my husband. I can't go in the ambulance with her because I have 2 other kids and I have my car. Like, what am I doing? And so she went in the ambulance. I took the other kids to the hospital and we got there before her. And that was like agonizing. I just remember being like, what are they doing? Is she okay? What is going on? And it was all of these things. And I look back now, I mean, it's been almost 11 years now. And I still can remember all of those. Like, so she finally gets there. And the strangest part for me was at that time, we didn't have a pediatric emergency room. We only
Right.
had an adult one.
Mm.
So she gets wheeled into this adult emergency room and into this room. And there's like 40 people in the room. And she's still non-responsive. And people are saying all these medical things and all this stuff. And I don't have
Which
a
is
medical
scary.
Oh, it was definitely scary. But the one thing I remember, and this is what your brain does, right? They couldn't get an oxygen read on her. She had nail polish on her fingers and on her toes. And they were like,
Mm.
"Where's the nail polish remover? And they were like, one of the nurses was running around looking for nail polish remover. And in my head, I went, she'll never wear nail polish again. Like that was just like my instinct was never again will she wear nail polish. And that day was crazy. I had to call my parents and I had to get my older children situated and my husband showed up. So she got into the hospital probably
How
about
old is Jordan at this time?
she was 8 when this happened.
Never had any epileptic.
Nope, nothing.
Or?
She had
Wow.
no, and we don't have a family history of it either.
Wow.
Yeah,
Like,
so
nothing you could have prepared for. Nothing.
no, definitely
It's just
not.
a
It's not.
normal everyday day for you. 3 kids in the car. It's a pretty normal scenario.
Yep, she had woken up not feeling well, so I thought she was a kid who didn't like to throw up. So I just assumed that she had some stomach thing and she wasn't feeling great. And if I look back, there were probably signs that something was going on. She had lost some weight and people commented like they do with girls, which is bad, but they were like, "Oh, she looks so good." And I was like, "Yeah, she's 8." Like, you know, but I didn't notice it at the time, right? And then a few days before, she was complaining that her stomach bothered her, and but then she was fine, so I didn't think anything of it. Like I didn't
Epilepsy
know.
is the last thing you're thinking of with
It totally was.
a
Yeah,
bad stomach.
yeah, it totally was. And I had given her Tylenol in the morning, so of course, as a parent, I'm like, "Oh my god, did I do something? Like, it was giving her
Mm.
Tylenol the wrong thing to do?" Like, you just think all of these things.
Mhm. Absolutely. I'm s I can't even imagine how scary that moment was, especially driving. You're driving while it's happening, so you have like you said, you have your oldest in the front seat with you yelling at you.
Mhm.
That's traumatizing enough. And then you have the other kid that just saw it happen in the back seat. You're driving, you need to pull over and figure out how to handle all of this, but you're still like, you have your own emotions going on
Yeah,
as
so
a mom.
I think so. I have learned this about myself that, and something about humans that I think we have, right? So I just went into motion. I didn't think about the fear and the worry and that sort of stuff initially, right? Initially, it was, I need to get her help. I need to figure this out. We'll figure this out. And I think as humans, we become naive, right? We don't realize that things can happen in a split second, right? And we just don't realize it. But when that thing happens, you are capable of doing so much more than you realize. So many people say that to me, like, I don't know how you did it, or like, how have you done this? You have to become strong, and you will. If you're confronted with these things, you learn how to do it. Just kind of like the pandemic, right? Nobody knew a year ago that we were going to be living the way we were, but we all figured out how to adapt and how to adjust. And I think that in that moment, the fear was not so much there in that moment. It was more like, okay, how do I do this?
The adrenaline goes right through
Yes.
you.
Yeah.
And also, I was a lifeguard for years. A lot of the shock, it makes you very cold, and all of a sudden, like, you know how to do everything.
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
Wow. So what happened after that? So you're in the hospital and the nurse is running around trying to find nail polish remover. What
Yeah.
a weird thing to be running around trying to find. That's the last thing you're thinking about.
It was so like, that was like the thing. So
Like, this is what's gonna make it a huge problem right now.
I know, right? It was like nail polish remover. I'm like, she can't breathe. She's foaming at the mouth. She's shaking like, and you want nail polish remover. It was very bizarre. But also I understand why, because they couldn't get an oxygen level on her. And that's important because they didn't know, like, to be able to assess. So basically what happens is she stays in the emergency room for I don't know how long. Like the day kind of goes. And I remember them telling us, okay, we're going to bring you up to the pediatric intensive care unit waiting room because she's going to go to the PICU, which is the intensive care unit. And we sitting outside, my husband and I are sitting outside. And I don't know, I think it was like around 1:30, somewhere around there. And a nurse comes out and is like, oh, your daughter had a seizure. You'll probably be here like a day. Has this ever happened? Asks us a couple of questions. And she leaves. And we're sitting and we're sitting and we're sitting. And it was an hour and a half later. And I look at my husband and I say, if she's dying, can they just come tell me? Can they let me go see her? Like, I hadn't seen her since 8:30 this in the morning when she had that first seizure. So like, that's a long time to
A
wait,
long time.
especially when you don't know anything.
And an 8-year-old.
Hmm.
That's
Yeah. So at that moment, I think something like I've always been an advocate for things and I've always kind of had this drive. But at that moment, I was like, no other parent is going to have to go through this. Like there has to be changes when the hospital. And we found out later that they had to do another spinal tap and they had to do these things. And
But someone needs to be communicating this with you, because
yes,
in your mind, you're thinking she's laying there in a room with no one, because if no one's telling you, then that means nothing's being
right.
done.
Or
That's what you're
she's like
thinking.
laying in a room
Then you're
dying
really
and
at.
people are trying to save her. And so that's a really hard thing. And hospital rules need to change around that. And so a part of how I became part of the patient advisory council and sitting on the different children's hospital committees was because of those experiences. And also because even though I don't think I'm outspoken as a person and I tend to be a little bit reserved and kind of go with the flow, I am definitely more outspoken when it comes to certain things than some people.
Well, it hits home for you. It hits a nerve. Anytime someone brings up these issues or any of the legislation that you're fighting, you go right back into that moment when you're sitting in a waiting room and you have no control over anything and no communication or no answers.
Exactly.
That would pissing me off right now.
Yeah, it was
That's really
definitely,
my experience.
yeah, it was definitely a tough experience. So basically, we get to go see her, and she's laying in a bed, and she's got tubes everywhere, and she's got breathing tubes, and she's got IVs, and at that time, this is interesting about like hospitals again. Our PICU was an older PICU, and so she was in this quad, and basically, it was 4 beds, and the only thing that separated those beds was curtains.
Yeah.
And it was right across from the nurse's station, and it was the high risk cases. So very quickly you learn, is that machine mine? What does that machine do? Like you learn all these things. I didn't want to go into medicine. I have 2 siblings that are in medicine. They love it. They thrive in it. Blood, and all it, nothing I want to do. But when you have a kid that is like not sure what's wrong with them and you're in that moment, you learn quickly a lot of things. And I became that person. I became the person that was like, I need to know. So, one piece of advice that was given to me that I recommend for anybody who has any kind of situation is get a notebook because I literally wrote down
Everything they told you?
everything. I wrote down the medication she was on. I wrote down her blood pressure, her stats. I wrote everything down and I wrote down like what the doctors would say so that I could go back. Or if I had questions, I could write those questions out in a notebook and I still have it. And it's part of her medical file that we take with us when we go to places. So it's super important because you're not going to remember everything. Just
Also, those nurses are handling way too many clients at once.
they do accept
You
in the
probably know
PICU.
more. PICU, it's less clients?
PICU, it's less. And I will say this, nurses probably were our best. Nurses and residents were our best
Yeah.
friends.
Okay, good.
So we were very fortunate. And we have a small hospital. Our hospital isn't huge in
It's a
our
blessing
town.
then.
Yeah. So I think in the PICU at that time, they had maybe 7 patients.
Oh, wow. That's manageable.
Yeah. And it was interesting because it was summer and they're not usually as busy in the summer. So that I think is another reason why, because PICU has an ebb and flow like everything else, where it has high times like in the winter and the summer is not a huge high time.
Right.
But I also learned about all the people around me and I knew what all their problems were because there's
Well, you were
no.
probably there day in, day out. How long
So,
was Jordan in the hospital for?
so
The first
at
time?
that
Was it just the
hospital,
day?
oh, no, no. So that hospital, she was there from August 3rd to like the 24th. And then we transferred to Boston Children's. And then September, she went to rehab and she came home from rehab September 15th. So the one thing about her situation is the day after she had her seizure. So I stayed that night. I slept in a cardiac chair. I request cardiac chairs all the time now if she's in the hospital because they're the most comfortable to sleep in, even though my husband hates them. And you can get them right next to a bed. So I sat in a cardiac chair with my head on her bed and holding her hand all night, looking at an EEG screen, which I knew nothing about.
Trying to figure it
And
out.
yep. Yeah, because it shows your brain waves. It's just showing all of the things that are going on in your brain. And hers was crazy. It looked crazy.
Fascinating?
So, yeah, I mean, if I knew a lot more, it was definitely fascinating. And through the years, it's that I like watching them. And at that time, the doctor, he came in the next day and was basically like, I don't know what's wrong with her. She could wake up with learning disabilities. She could wake up with behavioral issues. She could wake up as a different kid. She may never wake up at all. I just don't know. And that was like, okay, we're going to have to go tell our older kids and deal with this. So
How
that
old are
was.
your other kids? They're close in age, you said, so, like,
They are.
10?
So the one next to her was 10. They were 10 and 12.
Yeah.
10, 12. Yep. So
This is so hard on them.
it was. It was really hard on them. It was really hard on them. And so she ended up being put into a medically induced coma for 11 days. Yeah.
The longest days of your life?
Yeah. It's so like looking back and thinking about it, I go, well, we managed, like we did it, but it was really hard because she was never alone. Either I was with her, my husband was with her, or like I said, one of my sisters is in the medical field, so she might stay with her, or an aunt, or even my mom stayed with her, I think, one night. But someone from the family was with her always. So it was draining. I remember there are things I vaguely remember. Like I remember the first time I left the room, you just don't want to leave because you just don't know. And I remember a nurse coming in and it was about, I don't know, 4 o'clock in the morning, I think. And she was like, you need to go. And I was like, no, I'm okay. And she's like, no, take a walk, do something. And I went downstairs and they had a 24-hour Friendlies. I don't know if you guys have Friendlies in Canada, and I got a grilled cheese sandwich and a pistachio sundae with hot fudge at 4 o'clock in the morning. And it was
Sounds
probably the
amazing.
best meal I ever ate the entire time I was there. Because I had stayed with her for days. And they were like, you have to go. We have your number. She's in good hands. Like, you have to go. And that was the first time I was like, okay, I can leave. And then when she came out of her coma, this is really bad to say, but she was like Helen Keller. And I say that like,
That's probably scary.
so my husband couldn't deal with it, but she came out and she would scream and she didn't understand what was going on. And so I literally would have to sit and hold her face and be like, It's going to be okay. And I would just repeat that over and over and over again. I don't think she really understood. Like she had lost 2 weeks of her life. She had no, like, I don't think she had any concept or any clue. And again, another reason why I advocate is because her neurologist that started with us went on vacation as she was coming out of her coma. And we knew she was coming out of her coma. And we found out later when she was out of rehab and back home, and we had our first appointment with him, that she had been over medicated when she was coming out of her coma.
What does that mean?
So she had all these seizure meds that she was on. And one of them she was supposed to get, I don't remember the doses right now, but she was supposed to get a certain dose. And the ER doctors were giving her more than they should have. And I kept saying, like, okay, I don't think this is right. But they're the doctors, and our neurologist wasn't there. And the neurologist that was covering for him had come in at one point and he offered 3 different things that we could try. And I was like, yeah, we did all of that. Like, did you read her chart? I think part of why she came out of her coma so bad was because the medication was too high. But you live and learn, and you go through things and you advocate for change so that now I know better. And 11 years later, she has a really, really good team. And Jordan herself is a very much an advocate for herself and has been since a really young
Yeah,
age.
it seems that way. And it
Yeah.
seems like she's putting in the effort all the time to get better or just know what's going on or just
Yes.
fighting every day.
Yeah. So the interesting that happened, and then she goes to rehab and she has to learn, like,
Did she
I
have to
remember.
learn to speak and everything
Yep.
again?
Yep.
Wow.
So when she was, this is another thing I did as a parent. My kids always had input in things, right? I would ask them questions and we always were very honest and communicative. She didn't talk when she came out of her coma. I
Mm.
did know she was in there because one day she took my husband's phone and she was able to find my number and text me, I love you. And that was the first communication we had from her. Other than if she had to go to the bathroom, she had this stuffed moose and she would throw it on the floor. And that was to tell us that she had to go to the bathroom. But they wanted her to get a G tube, a feeding tube, because she couldn't keep getting fed through her nose and she couldn't go to a rehab facility without one. So that was really hard for me. That was just as hard as seeing her in her coma because I was like, I'm doing this thing to my child that she has no say in. And I know it's for her best, but it was really, really hard for me to be like, okay, let's do this. And she was a pain. Like, God love her. She would rip IVs out. We had to get her into surgery. They put 2 IVs in her foot and she got one of them out because she would rub her feet together. So she fought from day one when she woke up. She was fighting and showing that she was in there. So
Did she know what happened when she woke up? Did she
no,
understand what happened or no? Trying to
no.
explain it to her like it was not didn't make any sense?
No, she's seen pictures and we've talked to her about it, but she doesn't remember much of it at all. She remembers stories that we tell her.
Wow.
So she doesn't really remember any of
Does
it.
she remember anything before that seizure?
She remembers, so we went to a concert the Sunday before and she remembers part of that concert.
Okay.
But the Monday, so she had a friend over on the Monday before the seizure and they played and they were in the pool all day. She doesn't remember any of that.
Wow.
Yep.
It's crazy. You said that in your blog post or one of your Facebook posts that you were very happy with your neurologist, though. He was always willing to try things or just test anything new. He wasn't very traditional.
No, yeah, he wasn't. So that's one of the things that we found out later on. They didn't know what was wrong. But one thing that the neurologist did was he said, so I know in my blog or on Jordan's Facebook page, we talk about Brain on Fire, which is a movie and a book about a woman who had autoimmune encephalitis. And basically, if you watch her story or listen to her story, what happened to Jordan is basically the same thing. And she had autoimmune encephalitis. So basically, her body attacked her brain, caused the inflammation. And what happened was, is her neurologist said at that time in 2010, there was only I think two labs in the country that actually tested for the antibodies that cause autoimmune encephalitis. So we sent her blood to Pennsylvania to have it tested, but we started treatment without having the results of that. So she got IVIG, which is, and I never remember what it stands for, but it's an immune thing that they give you if you have autoimmune disorders. And I truly believe that the reason why she is as high functioning and where she is today is because of that treatment. Because I didn't know this. This is so interesting. Now, we're really good friends with her neurologist from back then. We still see him, but we also have other neurologists now. He and Jordan speak at conferences a lot. And at a conference, October of 2019,
Okay. Almost 10 years later.
yep, they were talking, and he said to us, he had told us at another conference, like, you play down her story and how sick she was. But I didn't know what he
Really?
meant. But then he told us, he's like, so you realize that when she came in and she was in her first days of her seizure before they put her in the coma, her brain looked like an infant that was having infantile spasms. So she was 8, but her brain looked like a baby that was having infantile spasms, a form of epilepsy that babies can get from high fevers or that sort of thing. I didn't know that until like almost 10 years later.
Wow. So yeah, when it's happening, you don't know everyone else's situations, but this neurologist sees many, many cases and he's thinking, this is one of the worst things I've seen.
Yes, absolutely. That's exactly what he thought. And now it explains why when he came to us that next day and was like, she could have all these issues because he didn't know what was going to
Yeah.
happen. The other thing that happened is that year she had some really strange things that happened, which also point to autoimmune encephalitis.
And obviously you've never heard of this before,
No, because in
but you know of
2010,
epilepsy before this.
not really.
Okay.
I mean, most people don't know about epilepsy unless
Yeah.
they are affected by it, I
Yeah.
feel like. I mean, I didn't really know a lot about it. And autoimmune encephalitis back then. So autoimmune diseases in general, the medical industry was like, our bodies won't attack themselves. And they really definitely didn't think they would attack the brain. So Brain on Fire was like 2009 and Jordan was 2010. Now in 2021, you can Google autoimmune encephalitis. There are groups on it and everybody has a different experience with it.
Mhm.
Jordan had a really big seizure, right? But some kids lose the ability to walk or
Oh, wow.
that sort of stuff. But Jordan had a couple other things that year. On Thanksgiving, she had another seizure. She went into the hospital and she was right side paralyzed.
Wow.
So that was like, okay, now she's paralyzed. And they thought she had a stroke and all this stuff. Bizarre because the very next day,
This is the
she was
same
fine.
year.
Same year. Yeah.
8 years old, thinking they had a stroke. That's
Yep.
ridiculous. That's so traumatizing.
Yeah. It was a crazy year. The following weekend, so that's Thanksgiving weekend. The following weekend, we go back into the hospital because now she won't sleep and she's hallucinating. Her and I were just talking about this because we laugh about it now. Like, you have to find the humor in bad situations. And we laugh about the fact that, like, she tried to stand up and pretend she was skateboarding in her bed. They're like, you have to keep her awake. You can't let her sleep. So she hallucinated for almost a full 24 hours because she hadn't slept in a few days. So they sent us home again with a bunch of different meds. The following weekend, we go back. The only way I can explain it, and I say this all the time, is if we're all driving on a highway and we're all doing 100 miles an hour, Jordan is going 5 miles an hour down that road. Her brain could not process anything.
Just very slow.
Yep.
That must be frustrating for you and her siblings and her dad.
Everybody, we would have to help her walk to the bathroom. She didn't remember numbers. She didn't remember letters. She couldn't remember anything. And I remember sitting down in the emergency room with the neurologist and saying, this is her new norm. Just tell me. We've been doing this for 3 weeks now and nothing is working. If this is what we've got to deal with, then let me know so I can prepare everybody because we're coming up on Christmas. And if this is the kid I'm going to have, then that's fine. Just let me know. And he looked at me and he said, I have a colleague who just came back from a conference. I want to try one more thing. And I said, okay. So we admitted her to the hospital and we gave her IV steroids. And in 2 days, she was better. And she was a normal herself, nothing,
Wow.
no issues, nothing. And she went from the middle of December 2010 until she hit 7th grade. So somewhere around 2015, she didn't have any seizures.
Wow. And was she kind of back to quote unquote normal kid between those years?
Yeah.
Like
Yep.
can speak, walk, everything
Yep.
fine?
So in
Wow.
rehab, they taught her, like, she had to do swallow tests to make sure she could eat. They did speech. She did therapy. She did physical therapy and occupational therapy for a while. She didn't really do much speech therapy because that came back. Her physical therapy, her gait was off a little. So she did all of the therapies for a while. She would get tired, so she had a wheelchair too. She was in 3rd grade at the time and she missed the whole first semester and she went back to school after February break. And she finished 3rd grade after February break and then went to 4th grade. So she didn't stay back.
Right. Wow. So
Yeah.
I gotta take a step back though.
Yeah.
You had so much trust in this neurologist, just undeniable trust. Why?
I don't know. He's my age,
Yeah.
which means nothing really, but there was just something about him that I was like, I can't fix it.
Mm-hmm.
And you are telling me that this might work, and might is better than nothing. So let's do it. Because we were there so much, because we spent so much time in that space, the nurses knew us, the residents knew us, and because I wanted so much information, like she had to have a blood transfusion. And, people are like, oh, blood transfusions. But the resident at the time, Dr. Kevin, my husband picks on me all the time because he was probably like 20 something years old. But he was cute and he had this Irish accent and he would sit and talk to me for hours. And when she had her blood transfusion, he explained to me, like, and I can't tell you now because I don't remember, but I remember him sitting there and explaining to me, well, she probably wouldn't develop this blood disorder because of these reasons. And he would write it out for me in my notebook, so that I could go back and refer to it.
This
I
team
just
went above and beyond to make you feel comfortable and safe and trust them.
Yes, and I had this desire to wanna trust them. I wanted it to be okay, so I was like, "Okay, let's do this. Let's figure this out. And I think through this whole journey, when she started having seizures again, I remember saying, "I think she's having seizures again," and going back to the same neurologist and talking to him, and he and I have butt heads over the years. As her
Bet.
seizures got worse, and in 2017, when she was having them so often, I was like, "Can we try CBD?" And he was like, "No, we don't know what that will do to her brain." And I was like, "Well, what
You're
about
willing to
brain?"
try everything else, but not the CBD?
No. And then I was like, "Well,
Interesting.
what about brain surgery?" And he's like, "No, I don't think she needs brain surgery." And so we would butt heads. And through the years, I track everything. So like I could say, I'm pretty sure that her hormones are what are causing her seizures. And I would bring him charts and I would bring him all of this stuff. And I got frustrated with him. I was like, I love you. You saved her life, but come on, this is not a way for her to live anymore.
When he said no, was he backing it up with good reasons?
Well, so the CBD stuff, I know that that is just his belief. And it's
Right.
interesting because she takes CBD now. But the reason why she takes CBD now is because it's an FDA approved medication. And he's
And
okay
it's
with
probably
that.
her choice.
No, he's okay with that because it's FDA
Okay.
approved. So it's controlled, right? He was afraid that if we tried CBD, that
He probably wouldn't be protected legally.
right, he wouldn't be.
Yeah.
Interesting though, because this is where he's also really good. If he doesn't know something, he will find it out for you, right?
Right.
So he wasn't on board with CBD, but one of the colleagues, he left our main hospital here in Western Mass and he went to Boston and we followed him to Boston. And his colleague in Boston is the one who worked on the clinical trials for getting the FDA approved CBD. She had 100 patients under her who used Charlotte's Web and Haley's Hope, which are 2 forms of CBD that are known to help the epilepsy community. So, although he wasn't necessarily on board, he had colleagues who were. So, he was good to say, I'm not sure, but go talk to this doctor and let's look at switching her diet and let's look at these things. So, he's really good about that. And
He's open-minded. He's willing to learn.
yeah. And he's willing to say, this is above me. She goes in to see him and she's like, okay, when can we go have coffee? Can I have your phone number? Like, she's just so comfortable with him. And he doesn't really treat her much anymore because she sees another neurologist there who is the one
Right.
that did the brain surgery.
Wow.
Yeah. But he's like family. He really is.
So remind me about years this. I pulled this again from one of your blogs or Facebooks, but you said Jordan has had 34 seizures since her surgery on September 18th. This may sound like a lot, yet a year before that, she had 67 seizures. What year is this?
So it's comparing September of 2019 to, I don't know when I wrote it, but sometime I feel like January, February of 2020.
So very recent.
Yeah,
So
because her surgery was.
seizures have always been happening. They've never stopped.
So they stopped for that time frame from 2010 to 2015.
Mm-hmm.
Then she hit puberty. and they
Mm.
slowly increase. And in
And that's why you
2000,
think it's always related to hormones.
yes, absolutely.
Right.
And in 2017, when they increased, and I got frustrated with her neurologist here, we took her to Cleveland for a second opinion. And after we took her to Cleveland, we met a new neurologist back in Boston. And the new neurologist that we met back in Boston, who partners with her original neurologist, is amazing. She's the best. I love her first neurologist because he saved her life. And I love her second neurologist because she is so team player. We are included in the entire process.
And it's interesting that your new neurologist is a woman, and the issue that you think it's hormones, a woman is gonna be more willing to hear that out than a man, because
yes,
we deal with
and
hormones every single day.
absolutely. And a woman who has a daughter who has an autoimmune disorder.
Did you find this neurologist yourself filtering
Uh,
people out?
no. Her original neurologist
Referred?
works with her. Once we went to Cleveland and I was looking at brain surgery and the first level of evaluation, he was like, okay, let's start talking to this doctor because it does a lot with brain surgeries. We have been with both of them since 2018.
When you're saying in the 60s or 30 seizures a year, that's one every week, one every second week.
So people who live with epilepsy, there's like 40 different kinds of epilepsy, right?
Oh,
So
okay.
when we think about epilepsy, we probably think about a tonic-clonic or grand mal seizure where a person falls to the ground, starts convulsing, is foaming at the mouth, is non-responsive, because that's what media portrays. And that is a type of seizure. Jordan's seizures are what are called complex partial. So it doesn't affect her whole brain. So what happens is a seizure starts in a small part of your brain, right? And then it spreads quickly. And so for people who have tonic-clonics, it starts in a part of your brain, like this one spot, but then it spreads so quickly to your whole brain. That's what causes your body to convulse. For Jordan, her seizures start in a spot and then it spreads, but it only goes to her hippocampi, which is where, depending on which side, because she has them on both sides, which side of her brain is affected, she'll walk, she'll talk, she'll repeat sayings, or she'll try to communicate, but it won't make any sense at all because it affects her language center. So there's so many different types of seizures. Hers just present a certain way.
I didn't know that. Interesting.
Yeah.
Is
There's
hers more common in, like, kids and young adults, though?
no, I don't think so. There's different types. Like there's Dravet's, which is a syndrome, and there's Lennox-Gastaut, which is another one. There's so much within the epilepsy. There's Fires, which is presents kind of like it starts like Jordan's, but then those kids tend to have lots of learning disabilities and continue to have seizures. So for Jordan, she cluster seizes and has these complex partials. So when I say 67 seizures from September 18th to February 20th, what happens is she may have 3 days where she has like 10 seizures, but then she'll go 3 weeks without having any seizure and she'll be at her baseline and she'll be a normal young adult.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's how hers present.
Wendy, how do you get to have a life? Like, there always has to be someone with Jordan, no?
So yes.
I'd be scared to leave her.
So in the beginning, it was really hard. It was really hard to kind of let her be by herself. She gets mad because I constantly say, like, if she goes to the bathroom and she's in there for too long, I'm like, are you okay? I'm much better now. But when she was young, like, that was really hard. As time has gone on, she wants to live a life. She wants to be independent. She wants to be able to do things that normal 19-year-old kids do. So we have a balance. And since surgery, things have gotten a little bit better, but we don't stop living our lives, right?
Obviously, you put a pause on if seizures happen, though.
So yes and no. So
Okay.
if we're at home and she has a lot of seizures, we may change our plans because we know she's not going to be able to function. But when we went to Aruba and she had a seizure when we got there, so we were there for, I think, 5 days, and I think she had seizures like 2.5 out of the 5 days. But we didn't stop what we were doing. We just adjust. We try not to cancel plans.
She'll probably have a lot of guilt if she thinks you guys are pausing your guys' lives for her, hey? Or what do you think?
When she was younger, I don't know that she did. Now that she's
Yeah, well,
getting
she didn't know
older,
how, yeah.
right. Now that she's getting older, I think it's more frustration than guilt. I think it's
Yeah.
more of a frustrated, like, how do I do this? And
And
I've learned,
stop taking care of me, let me be independent.
yes. And
Yeah.
I have learned that now that she's older, there are times where I'm out and I'll be like, oh, I should go home. I don't know how she's doing. Even if she's not having seizures. Like I think these things in my head because it's hard to not have her be a part of my identity. So I'm really learning how to do that. And so there are times where I've come home from being out to lunch with friends and I come home and I'm like, okay, you don't want to do anything with me? She's like sitting on the couch reading or watching something. And I'm like, I guess I could have stayed out longer. I guess I didn't have to rush
At
home.
what age was Jordan when that started flipping?
So that probably started flipping more recently.
Okay.
When she was like high schoolish, I still had that more of that attachment. So she didn't really start getting frustrated with her seizures until she was like a junior in high school, a sophomore, junior in high
Right.
school. Like for a long time, she felt was part of who she was. It was like her identity. Although we never let it define her, in her head, she was like, well, this is who I am. I have seizures. As she got older and she was like, I can't drive, but I'd really love to drive. I really want to go to college. I really want to work in the medical industry. And having seizures before she had her surgeries, she's had two, she was having seizures like 2 times a month. Like you're losing like 2 weeks out of a 4-week month.
Yep.
Back when she was a freshman, sophomore, I wanted to look at surgery and she was like, no. And then junior year, she was like, absolutely.
So getting surgery so that she can be able to go to college, is that what you mean?
To help control the seizures.
Right.
So we knew that her seizures were, she has left and right side seizures, and she had these nodules in her brain. Not
Okay.
tumors, but almost like scar tissue, but they were. So the first surgery we did was to remove those to see. So basically,
When was this surgery?
that was in January of 2020.
So a year ago. Wow.
So a year ago. And when you think about seizures, the other thing you think about is that it's a highway, right? The seizures follow this path, and it's usually always the same. They follow this highway in your brain. And we thought if we took the nodules out, it would disrupt that highway. And maybe we would see a little bit of relief. And we did see a
Okay.
little bit of relief. So we disrupted the highway. Then we had to go back in and we had to do an SEEG, which is where they drill holes in your head and they put electrodes deep inside your brain. And
Is that scarier than it is? Scarier sounds scarier than it is, or it's pretty scary?
so the first time she had it done was in May of 2019, and I couldn't function. I remember saying to my husband, like, I have always been the one that has been with her, right? I'm usually the one that is in the hospital with her. I'm usually the one that goes to appointments with her. I have kind of been that caretaker. And then something flipped, probably me, menopause, anxiety, all of this stuff. And in 2019, she was in the hospital for 3 weeks and I literally couldn't do it. Every time I was there, I was in tears. My anxiety was high. And I remember it was my anniversary. They took her into the hospital. They took her down for the surgery the first time she did the SEEGs. And we got her to the elevator and I burst into tears and I was like, I can't do this. I can't do this. I can't do it. Like, I literally was like, I cannot do this. And my husband and I walked to Whole Foods because there's a Whole Foods right near the hospital. And we got sushi and we sat outside and we ate. It was our anniversary. And he was like, it's going to be okay. And then she came up to the room and I saw her and I saw what the depth electrodes looked like. And I talked to her and I was like, okay, she's okay. Still couldn't stay in the hospital or that time. I didn't really stay with her. I think I stayed with her one night because every time I was in there, I had this panicky anxiety. Like I just couldn't do it. In all of these 11 years, like I was the one that I was the rock. I was the one that kept everybody together. My older two were like, no, we don't need therapy because we have mom. And my husband was
That's a
like,
lot to take on.
it is so huge, so huge. And then at some point I broke and I was like, wow, like
And I bet a dam broke.
yeah,
A
it was,
waterfall.
yeah, it was not pretty. It was not good. And it was so difficult for me to look at myself and be like, I can't do this anymore. Like, how am I going to do this? How am I going to function? And so it took a lot of personal reflection and getting myself help and realizing that it's okay to say, I can't do this. I don't have to be that strong person anymore. And it's not that I'm not that strong person anymore. I'm still that same strong person. But I also am like, okay, it's okay. So now in the past 3 years, my husband has done a lot more with her and helping her and staying with her in the hospital when she's in the hospital. And it's this balance. Like in the beginning, when
Mhm.
she was younger, I did everything and I was that primary caretaker. And now she wants her independence and he's willing to he treats her differently too. I think it's a mom dad thing.
Yeah, definitely.
I still have that fear. I don't know if it's because I was there when she first had that seizure.
You've seen it all.
Always in the back of my head is that when's the next shoe gonna fall? When is the next thing gonna
You're always
happen?
just waiting.
And he doesn't do that. He's just like, it's
Men
fine.
are
Like,
so much better at that than us. We're
yeah.
all worried.
She had seizures a week ago, 2 weeks ago, or something like that. And then she got into the college that I work at, and she said to me, "Mom, can I go to work with you on Thursday so I can walk around the campus?" And I went, "You wanna what?" She's like, "Well, I wanna walk around the campus." She's like, "It's gonna be a really nice day here, and I wanna walk around and get a feel for it." And I was like, "By yourself? No, you can't." Like, in my head, I'm like, "You can't do that. Like, you just." But that's my own fear, my own insecurity about it. It has
Yep.
nothing to do with her. It's me.
What do you
Inside of,
do with
like
that though? Now
so
that you know, what are you doing
I
about it?
so I started journaling again, I started meditating again, I'm looking at going back to therapy because I think that, like, talking it through with somebody else who might give me a different perspective would be good. But it's definitely much harder for me now than it was before. Like,
Funny.
yeah, yeah. And I don't like I said before, I don't know if it's, like, because my hormones are all over the place through because of menopause
Maybe.
that, like,
But you're also probably feeling like she's detaching herself from you, and
totally is.
you've been attached to the hip for 11 years, so it's almost like a little bit of a breakup for you. She
Absolutely.
doesn't need you as much anymore, and that's hard on anyone.
Yeah, and so but that's what you want for your kids, right? You want them to
You
grow, you want
do, but
them
it's
to
still
fly.
hard.
So it's interesting though, because my older 2 are, like I always say, overcompensated and they got all of these things. And I always felt guilty that I never did enough for them because I always with her. And now I'm like, well, now she's going too. Yeah, she's been such a part of me and such a part of my identity that it's like, how am I going to do this? And I don't know. I'm still working through it.
Wendy, you are probably left right now with who is Wendy without
hmm
a daughter with epilepsy,
Yeah, I still have a daughter with epilepsy, but um,
one that doesn't need you as much anymore.
exactly. And that's a hard place to be.
You have a lot more time on your hands, so
I
who
do.
is Wendy without with all that time?
Yeah, so, I mean, part of it is working, right?
You have 2 businesses?
Part of it is my businesses, part of it is going back to things that I loved, right? Years ago when my kids were little, I owned a craft business for
Cool.
kids, and so tapping back into those creative sides, going back to working out, which is something I struggled with. I used to do it all the time, 6 days a week. I was always at the gym. And then when I had kids, I still worked out, but it looked different. And then after Jordan had her seizure, I didn't work out as much. And now she's really into working out. Jordan is. And she's
Cool.
really into wanting to build muscle. So now I'm like, okay, well, maybe our dynamic can change. Like we can
That
go
can be your
from,
thing, yeah.
right. We can go from being like this attached, weird thing that
Caretaker
happened
and patient.
to we can work out together. And I'm trying to also do things with her, like going to the mall and going shopping, just normal things. So
That
it's
doesn't have anything to do with epilepsy.
right. That does
I'm sure that
nothing to do
gets
with that.
tiring for both of you.
It does. I remember when she was in high school. So she missed the entire first semester of her junior year because we just couldn't get her seizures under control. And every time she was in school, she was seizing. So it was like, okay, we're just going to not go to school. You can do schoolwork at home. Thankfully, my parents are retired. She stayed with them while I worked. Once she got back to school, I was like, okay, we're going to take the afternoon off. And she's like, what do you mean? And I'm like, we're going to go to the pottery place because she likes painting pottery. And she's like, but I miss so much school. And I said, yeah, but you need a mental health day. That has nothing to do with being sick and has nothing to do with being a kid who has epilepsy. And I think we forget that. Like, I think that
A lot of power in that.
when you are constantly going to doctor's appointments and constantly missing things because you have seizures and constantly worrying about, will I have a seizure? You forget that taking mental health days or doing normal things will help you when the days are bad. And so that was one of the things that I really wanted her to learn was that it's okay to say, I feel good today. I'm going to take the day off
That's
instead
so
of
empowering for
I
both of
always
you.
feel sick. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Even when my kids were little and they weren't sick, I was never a parent who was like, you have to have perfect attendance because I think it's not like, You don't need perfect attendance. You need to be able to
That's a
say
social construct.
it is. And as adults, we don't do that, right?
No, that's weird.
As adults, if we were like, I just don't feel like going to work today, you take a day off
Yeah.
just because, not for any other reason, because it's the first nice day and you want to drive to the beach. Well, kids should be able to do the same thing because they need mental health days just as much as adults do.
Yeah,
So
you got that right.
that is something I did teach my kids. I don't know that it's a great thing because, I
It makes them better off.
I
And
want them
it
to be
seems like your
grounded.
kids are pretty empowered, so that probably stems from that.
Yeah, they are.
They're very individual thinking.
Yeah.
Like even though you do have a daughter that's been sick since she was 8, I wouldn't call her dependent. Like dependent given the scenario, but seems like she's pretty independent and wants her time to herself and everything.
Yes, she very much is. So she had her seizure when she was 8, and the new residents at the hospital start the following July. So July of 2011, they said to her and I, they're like, "So, do you want to come and speak at new resident orientation?" And she was like, "Okay." So she, from like 6 months after having her seizure, became that person who was like, "Okay, I'm going to talk to doctors." And
Wow.
has continued that. Her biggest thing, as she says, is that I'm the patient. So even though I'm a kid, you're doing it to my body,
Mm,
not your body, not my parents. So you need to tell me everything.
that's a different
Doctors.
outlook.
Yeah, well, she really feels that she's the patient and she's
Yeah.
right, right?
Oh, she is, absolutely.
Seizure medicine has a lot of side effects, right? It has,
Pretty powerful.
being tired, it has memory loss, all of that stuff can come just from the medicine, not just the seizures. So she wanted to know, and she was on some bad ones. She had one that she took that we called Dopamax because she couldn't remember words. So it made her
Scary.
like dumb. It was bad. But she was aware. She's like, this medicine is awful. So I don't want to take it anymore.
Holy
So
crap.
yeah,
Wendy, you've had a crazy 11 years,
I
and
have.
it's not stopping anytime soon. This is something that you're gonna live with for the
Yeah.
rest of your and Jordan's life.
Yes. Yes. And the
But
hope
it's
is that,
manageable now, right?
yeah. I mean, she's looking at living on campus, which is exciting and scary all at the same time. She's looking at getting a seizure dog because her seizures aren't completely controlled.
Did
And
she get accepted to get the seizure dog?
so she has been accepted. We're just waiting to see what the process is.
Cool.
So we're
That's
pretty
really
sure that
exciting.
she's accepted. So we're hoping that within a year from now, because I think that that will give her even more independence and more freedom because she won't feel nervous about being out in public.
Well, she can go for a walk on her own and do a lot of
We have
things
a
on her
dog. She
own.
takes our dog for a walk.
But obviously that dog is not trained in case
No,
anything
it's not,
happens.
but it does give her independence to walk around the
Yeah.
block. And that was a big step for me because she does it on her own and she takes her phone and she knows. And
Yeah.
she's usually has a really good sense of when she's going to have a seizure. And because I
Mhm.
think it's hormone related, I can pretty much predict now. Her neurologist said, if she's like, Wendy, if you're a seizure predictor, then, we should hire you. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not. I'm like,
Seriously?
my kid, I can predict my kid's seizures, but you can't put 10 people in front of me with epilepsy. I'm not predicting their seizures, but my kid,
With a kid without epileptic seizures, you know
Mhm.
their mood swings and when they're coming. So it's very
Exactly.
correlated.
So that's what it is. I track her seizures
Yeah.
and I track her menstrual cycle. So I
Yeah.
can say,
And they're probably pretty aligned.
they are. So I can say,
Interesting.
"Oh, look it. She
We're
had
3
seizures
days
a month
away.
ago." It's not so much gut wrenching anymore for me. Like in the beginning,
You can plan for it a bit.
you can. And in the beginning, I would be like, wow, she made it a month. And then she would have one and I'd be like, ugh, she had a seizure. Right. But it's not so much anymore. Now, like we laugh about it because she does such crazy things when she has seizures that you're like, what are you doing? And she doesn't remember. But then I look at it and say, what's going to happen when she's in the real world? Right.
I know.
When she's not in
You're
the
more
safety of
worried
this
than she
house.
is.
I am. She's not as worried. She's really not.
And that gives you more to worry about.
Yeah. It's one of those things. You worry about your kids no matter what, right? Because they're your kids. But when you add this level to it, you're like, there's this part of me that's like, yes, I want her to be independent. I want her to do all these things. And then there's that other part of me that's like, oh, but do I? Do I really like? And that's, again, it's my own things. Like they're my own fears. And I just have to own up to them and be like, it's okay.
I mean, the first step is awareness,
Yeah,
you
absolutely.
know? because a lot of people in your situation would deny it, you
Yes.
know?
A lot of people don't share about their epilepsy because there's still a lot of taboo around it.
You
There's
know,
still a lot
I
of misunderstanding around it, and, like, they still joke about it. Jordan always says, "You never make fun of somebody who has cancer. Why is it okay to make fun of somebody who has epilepsy?"
Mhm.
And she went to a performing arts school and had to talk to kids sometimes, like, when they were in improv classes, because this person can just pretend to be having a seizure, and she's like, "Yeah, no, you can't do that."
Mm.
But people don't look at epilepsy that way. People who don't live with epilepsy don't understand it in some respects. And I think with anything, if you don't live with it, you don't get it. I talk about at one time, like, forgetting things. She's had really bad seizures where she's forgotten who we are.
Wow.
Like, we kind of joke about it, right? I mean, I forget things, but not like that, not to that level.
Even forgetting something small, it's kinda scary to me.
Yeah.
So imagine forgetting your entire family and not knowing who they are.
Yep.
That's heartbreaking for everyone.
Yeah. The other thing too is, like, people who live with epilepsy, we talk about when she was at graduation and the woman didn't know she was having a seizure and pushed her and yelled at her. And it was an experience that was really
Wow.
bad for her. But then my dad and I were talking one day about something, and I said, "Dad," I was like, "if she was in public and the police saw her, they may try to arrest her. They may try to do something, and she's not going to be able to communicate with them." And so that's why raising awareness and explaining to people this is so important, because she could get hurt,
Mhm.
or someone with epilepsy could.
How do you raise awareness? I wanna switch gears. I wanna ask
Yeah.
you a little bit about your advocacy. What is the work in advocacy? You said you spoke to senators, you're changing legislation. So give me a bit of a high level overview of what you're up to.
Sure. So right now, I'm not doing this one as much as she is, but she's working on legislation in our state to have seizure safe schools as a mandate. And so what that would do,
Yeah, what does that mean?
it means that every school within the Commonwealth of, we're in Massachusetts, every school would have to have training around seizure safety, and not just the nurse. So it would be the nurse, all of the teachers, all the administration, and all the students, so that it
Interesting.
would be everybody within a school community would have to have some level of training so that they would know how to handle somebody if they were to have a seizure. And that is super important in the sense that when she first started having seizures again, she was not ready to kind of be like, "I need help with this." So her classroom would be on the second floor, and she'd feel a little off, and she'd say, "Can I go to the bathroom?" And then she would leave and she would walk down the stairs and go to the nurse. And I'm like, "You can't do that. You have to have somebody with you." And she would be like, "Well, my seizures aren't bad. I can walk during them." And I'm like, "But they could change." Because that's the other
Yeah.
thing. Seizures can change at any time. So you could feel fine and then you could turn into a tonic-clonic and fall down the stairs and hit your head. So having awareness isn't just for everybody around them, but also for the kids so that they feel comfortable. Not everybody's like Jordan.
I think everyone would go into shock if I was a student and another student went into a seizure. I would have no idea what to do. I wouldn't even want to touch them, afraid I might hurt them even more. So I
Yes.
think training for students, especially in grade school, is fantastic.
Yeah, and so what she did is she would every year talk to her classmates and be like, "Okay, I may look at you and say I have to go to the nurse and you have to take me and it's fine and you won't get in trouble." So that's what she's working on right now. In years past, we've gone down to DC and we've advocated for funding and research, because even though epilepsy is one of the most common brain disorders, the funding for it is one of the least. So,
Wow.
yeah, so there's not a ton of funding around it. And then the other thing that we advocate for is step therapy.
Okay, what is that?
So if a doctor says you should take this medication, the insurance company may say, "Well, you need to try this one and this one first." Whereas the step therapy would do away with that. It would say, if the doctor says this is the medication you should take, that's what you should take. You shouldn't have to fail 3 other medications before you get the one that the doctor thinks will work best.
So advocating for step therapy is saying, let's just jump to the right medication.
Yeah.
Interesting. I would have thought that what made more sense was to go the other way, but
Yeah, no. So those are the main things that we work on.
wow,
So,
you're doing incredible work.
yeah, she's actually taken on that role more than I have.
And do you think she'll take on a role big like that when she goes to college?
Yeah, I think she'll continue it.
Yeah.
Springfield College is where she's thinking of going, and they are a huge community service type college. It's a
Mm.
very small college, but their students do like 120 1,000 hours of advocacy or community service of some type
Wow.
every year. So I think that's why it's also a good fit for her because she'll have that community that thinks the same way she does and has that
A great
like-minded
like program and
advocacy.
mandate.
Yeah. So
Huh.
I think it'll be good.
Very cool. So, Wendy, to start closing it all out,
Yeah.
first question is what's next for both of you? What does the future look like? And the second question I have is kind of any messages that you want to leave the listener with, because I would say majority of people don't know anything about epilepsy. Well, they do now after today, but any words of advice to anyone that may have an incident with epilepsy or anyone that's dealing with epilepsy themselves?
That's a great question. Well, for her, next step is college, right? She's going to go to college. She is still trying to figure out what she wants to do. She knows she wants to go in the medical field. So for her, that's her next step. She'll continue advocacy. She'll continue all the stuff that she's doing. But I think college is the big thing for her. And I think she's excited about it.
And
Um,
even more importantly, you. What's
Me?
next?
Yeah. So for me, it's interesting. My life is, I don't know, it's going to change, right? My oldest is moving to Chicago. My middle one is graduating from college and probably having a job. And she may go live on campus. So it would be the first time in my 23 years of being married that I would not have a single child in my house. And so that's scary and
Wow.
exciting. So I don't know. I would love to say that I would travel some, but with COVID, I don't know.
Soon, soon, I think.
Um, I'm hoping that I have a back bedroom that I've been trying to turn into an office, so I'm hoping that I can, like,
Do little
clean that out
renos?
and do that. And then the other thing is decluttering my house.
Mhm.
That is a big thing for me right now. And so advice that I would give to listeners, one piece of advice that I would give is that if you have somebody in your family that has epilepsy or you are confronted with it in the beginning and you're unsure, know that you're not alone and seek out help. Look up the Epilepsy Foundation. I wish that I had known about the resources that were available when she was 8, and I didn't. I didn't know where to look, even with the internet. Like, it was so overwhelming in the beginning to try and find help that I think that that's what I would tell people that, like, go on Facebook and find a support group. And also know that, like, just because you have epilepsy doesn't mean you can't do things. Like, you can live your life. It's not the end of the world. It's really not. It may seem like it at first, but it's really, really not. You can totally get through it.
And one last piece of advice I wanna get from you is any words of advice or hope for parents of sick kids on how to take care of themselves through this
Yes,
process?
that's super important. Super, super important. It's really hard to take care of yourself, but you have to start small. Find that one thing that you really enjoy. Like for me, in the beginning, it was going for coffee with a friend. And literally, I would go out for a half hour. And even though she was with my husband, and even though I knew she was in good hands, I still had that hard time detaching. And I think that if you start slow and work your way up to those places of being able to go out for like an overnight and leaving them with somebody that you trust, because I always say, put your oxygen mask on first. And I never got it until I had a kid who needed help. Because if I don't take care of me, I can't take care of her.
And last but not least, Wendy, where do we find you? If anyone wants to follow along with yours and Jordan's journey, where do they find you?
Sure. So we have a blog, which we're working on, which is called Seizing for a Cure. And it's the number 4 for the 4. And she has a Facebook page, which is called Jordan's Brain Surgery Journey. So you can find us at either of those two places. And if you have questions, please reach out because I don't want people to feel alone in this journey because you're not.
Wendy, thank you so much for your time. I know you were a little nervous at the beginning, wondering if you'd be a good guest. And I have just sat here enjoying your story the whole time. It's been so genuine and real, and I love it. And one thing I have to say, I always like to ask people the dates of when things are happening. And the reason for that is I always bring myself, what was I doing in September 2010? And I'm probably gonna cry right now, but I realize what I'm doing in September 2010, and then I think, wow, this woman, Wendy, and her daughter are going through these traumatic events, and it really puts things in perspective. So
It does.
thank you.
I always say when you're in the hospital, time stands still. And it is interesting to see what other people were doing back then and like how their lives were. And they were just living them with no clue about what anybody else is going through. And that's important to remember because you may not know what someone else is going through.
I know. Wendy, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.